Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, fine-tuning the Ivanti Console to fulfill the critical security controls 1 through 5. I'm John Bartz with Network Consulting Services, celebrating 15 years of service to you, and I've got Brian Hodzik, Senior Director of Engineering Solutions, here with us today. Hi, Brian.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning. And you're going to run through the Ivanti Console, set up the instance, and take full advantage of the security tools, checking off CIS Controls 1 through 5. This is a free training webcast, part of our ongoing training series, a benefit of being a customer of NCSI. If you'd like to see a list of our signature concierge benefits, you can visit our contact page on our website. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webcast in the Q&A section. We'll go over them live as we're going through this stuff, and we'll help monitor that as well, Brian. We are recording this, and we'll send the link out to you later today if you happen to, if you need to drop off or miss a part of it. We're going to try and keep it to 40 to 50 minutes. If there's any part of this you'd like us to dive into deeper with you, please let us know after the webcast, and we'd be happy to do that. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Brian, take it away.
All right, thanks, John. All right, today we're going to be talking about the CIS CSC Top 5 Security Controls. We're going to kind of compare it to an Ivanti product and see how we can help. So let's talk about number 1, inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. And the details on that are we need to actively manage via inventory, track, and record, and correct all hardware devices on the network so that only authorized devices are given access, and unauthorized devices and unmanaged devices are identified and prevented from gaining access. The tools we're going to use for that is our unmanaged device discovery. We're going to use some reporting, some queries, and data analytics. So let's jump into the console and kind of see how we can start tackling number 1. So let me pull up my console here. The version I'm using today is version 2017.1. For those not familiar, Ivanti has obviously changed its name recently from Landis to Ivanti. They've also changed the nomenclature of the product that you're used to from Landis Management Suite. Now it's called Ivanti Endpoint Manager. So that's the console we're going to fire up here. Just give it a second to open up. And please use that Q&A panel that you have to ask questions as we go along. I'll try and kind of at the end of each number stop and answer questions. All right, sorry, just give me a minute here as it opens. This version 2017.1, you probably saw on that main screen, actually has a build number of 10.1.10.287. Relatively speaking, most of the things we're going to go over today would be valid in previous versions if you're running a previous version of LDMS or Endpoint Manager. All right, so one of the kind of core aspects was making sure that our inventory information is accurate. So, you know, how on earth do we make sure that our inventory is accurate inside of our system? One of the most important parts, in my opinion, is making sure that our machines are reporting with accurate inventory information. So let's go to our configuration here under Agent Settings. When we install an agent, it is programmed to call home on a certain interval. You know, every X number of something, you know, call home with an inventory scan. That could be a number of days. It could be, you know, set off on a separate schedule. So let's kind of go into that and look at some examples on how you can kind of keep this accurate. So here under Inventory Settings, the schedule is probably the most interesting part of this. Using a recurring schedule, this is very convenient for your relatively static devices. Think workstations, you know, things that are powered on most of the time. A schedule works out really well. I recommend that you have this run every single day. And as a matter of fact, this is the default setting for inventory scans, is run every single day. What happens is when an inventory scan kicks off, it checks to see whether it has already previously done an inventory scan, and if it has done an inventory scan, it only does a delta scan. What that means to us is it will only send to the server the changes, the delta file. So really there's no huge drawback to having this run very, very frequently, as frequently as every 1 day. Inventory generally doesn't change day to day so much that you need to worry about doing it inter-day. So 1 day is usually good enough. I don't like to have any other constraints associated with it. These other boxes are telling it not to run I always prefer to say, no, it's okay. It's quiet. It doesn't really impact the end user. They're not going to see anything pop up. So let's have that run, at least every day. Down here at the bottom, the additional random delay is nice, so not everyone on the network is running at the exact same time. However, you just will kind of spread it out over whatever time period you set right here. The next one that's really important is right here, when IP address changes. This is really important for devices like laptops. Maybe I'm going to roam through the building. I'm going to jump on 5 different access points, and maybe I'm going to get 5 different IP addresses as I do that. Your inventory is going to be cluttered with a lot of junk information if that's the case. If we keep this box checked, what's going to happen is the local device is going to recognize, wait a minute, I just changed my IP address. I'm going to do a quick delta scan update to the server to say that I have a new IP address, and here's that IP address. So that's going to ensure that this stays extremely accurate as IP addresses changes, as the computer changes, all of those. All right, so the next kind of thing you want to worry about is, how do I know whether this is working? How do I know whether my machines are accurate in their inventory information? So kind of here's one of the default views as you log in. You can kind of scroll through here and see all your different computers. This really doesn't tell me anything. It tells me the name of the workstation, the fact that it's a workstation, and the operating system name. How do I know if this information is relevant and current? Well, there's an inventory attribute. If you just open up the inventory on one particular machine, we have an inventory attribute that is, for this particular control where we're worrying about inventorying hardware, the one we want to look at is last hardware inventory scan. So if we open this up a little bit and scroll down here, you can see we have last hardware scan date. We also have some other last scan dates. We'll talk about a couple of them later. But last hardware scan date is the definitive measurement of when was the last time that this called home and gave us an inventory scan. So having that be very accurate helps you solve this particular control. So I want to have that a little bit more front and center. So what I do is I add that to my column sets. If I go up here to my column set configuration, maybe I'm going to make a new column set. I'm going to call it something like, well, Autofix inventory. I'm going to get rid of type because I don't care about type, but I am going to go down here to last hardware scan date. And I'm going to add last hardware scan date. Now when I save this column set and I set it as default, up here at the top I'm going to have, oh no, I added the wrong one. That was days since last inventory scan. Sorry, let me modify that. I need last hardware scan date. Add that column. Okay, so there's my last hardware scan date. Now, on my server, this is a demo system. I have a lot of junk machines that don't really exist, so don't worry too much about my dates. But you can see, if I sort by that, I can tell very, very quickly which one of my machines are calling home and which ones are not calling home correctly. There's a setting that we can tweak and change that, it all depends on the customer preference, but the idea behind it is, should we keep old inventory scans? The example being this machine right here. The last time it ran an inventory scan was November of 2013. So we're coming up on 4 years old that I haven't seen from this device. The default setting is to retain inventory scans forever. We never purge them out. If you go under here under Configure Services and then go to the Inventory tab, there's actually a section right here that says Days to Keep Inventory Scans. 0 means keep them forever, but I could change it to something else. If I wanted to, for example, go in and change that to 180, we're going to purge out those inventory scans if we haven't seen them for 180 days. Now, it all depends on what kind of environment you have. Do you have a very fluid environment that changes quite a bit? Maybe you want the system to be automatically purging out data if the machine goes offline for 180 days. If you have a very static system, well, maybe you want to keep them forever, and you're just going to kind of look at these dates and maintain them to make sure those machines are staying up to date. So the Days to Keep Inventory Scan lets you control whether it's an automatic purge or a manual purge of those inventory scans. Purging is easy. I mean, I can just highlight these machines and hit delete, and they're purged out of the system. If you're concerned about it and you're kind of waffling on whether you should purge a particular device or not, one thing to always keep in the back of your head is if you delete it and the machine is really there, the next time I run an inventory scan, it'll show right back up in the console. So it's not that aggressive of a delete because a real machine will show back up. So if I have a lot of devices, I don't want to sit here and scroll through or sort based on that. How can I make a little bit more automatic way to pay attention to the machines that are not behaving well? My machines that are running inventory scans, very readily or regularly, I don't care about. They're working, they're functioning, they're behaving as they should. But what about my other machines? How do I know which ones are misbehaving? I can create a query over here that would maybe help me out with that. So, for example, what if I wanted to create a query that says, I want to know my stale computers. So I'm going to call this query stale computers, and I'm going to come up with a number. Maybe I'm going to say like 180 days. And I'm going to say, in the query section here, I'm going to say last hardware scan date is less than. And then over here on the edit values, if I went and put in actual date and just did the calculation of 180 days from now in the past, I would have to change this query every single time. So you can actually do some fancy SQL stuff in here. You can actually say get date minus 180. And what that's going to do is that every time you run the query, it's going to recalculate today's date. It's going to subtract 180 days from that, and then that's the benchmark it's going to use for our particular computers. So I'm going to insert that in as my query. Down here in the bottom, I'm going to add last hardware scan date. No, not that one. Last hardware scan date into my column. I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to run this query. So here's my stale computer query. So again, I have a lot of junk machines. I'm not surprised this is relatively full. But this gives you the ability to then have this query automatically run. I could create a report based on this. Maybe I want to turn this into a scheduled report, and I want to email it to the help desk every week. Every Monday to get this report, hey, the following 47 computers are not checking in. Are they still valid? Is someone out on vacation? Do we need to purge them because we've replaced those computers? You could do a lot of different things with that, with this particular query. We can force inventory scans. You could just highlight all of them and say, okay, I want these to run, an inventory scan right now, which is in our right here somewhere, inventory scan. So I could just say, hey, let's go force that scan to happen right now. Okay, so that helps us kind of take care of the computers that we theoretically know about, the machines that we manage in our environment. How do we worry about unmanaged or devices that we are not aware of? That's kind of a tricky problem because we just don't necessarily know what we don't know. So we're going to use a couple of different things to try and find those devices. First of all, we have unmanaged device discovery. So if we go here to our configuration, unmanaged device discovery, the theory behind unmanaged device discovery, right there in the name, unmanaged, which means we don't have an agent on them. If they have an agent on it, we don't consider them unmanaged, we consider them managed. So what you can do is you can click these little binoculars right here, and we can set it up to scan your network. So for example, I have the NCSI office here. I've gone in and added several different subnets. You can kind of put whatever IP address information you want in here. We can even do more complicated scans where we're scanning Active Directory, or we're discovering virtual hosts, things like that. But you can put your IP address ranges in here, and then you could scan them manually by hitting the Scan Now button, or better yet, we could hit Schedule Task. I could say, for example, I want an unmanaged device discovery scan to run every single day. So every day at 9 o'clock, it's going to kick off, and it's going to sweep the network looking for unmanaged devices. So what's going to happen is if it comes upon a computer that has an agent on it, it's effectively going to ignore it. It's just going to, pretend that it never saw that one, and it's never going to show up in any of these lists. If it comes up as something that's like an infrastructure item, like a router or a switch or a firewall or things like that, it's going to put them in this particular infrastructure group. If it's not really sure what it is, it may put it in this other. You can see we also have a printer section, virtual host, wireless access points. You can even go and create your own groups right here. So kind of the idea is you need to come up with a baseline. You need to go and scan your network, find all of these devices, and then go drag them into the corresponding sections. Oh yeah, this is a virtual host. Oh, this particular one is an HP switch. It's going to be infrastructure. So what you want to do is clean out this other section and the computer section and get agents on them, or you can say things like, oh, this is a Linux server. I'm never going to put an agent on it, so I'm just going to drag it into the approved devices or something like that. So once you establish that baseline, whenever these scans run, things that land in other or computers are going to be machines that are on your network and don't have LANDESK agents. By that logic, it's one of two things. It's a machine that needs to have an agent installed on it, or it's an unauthorized machine, and we can go track down why. So again, you could turn this into a query. You could have a report kick off once a week that gets sent to the help desk that says, hey, these 12 machines were just discovered today. What's the story with them? Should they be on the network? Do they have agents on them? And as soon as we get agents on them, they get automatically removed from the unmanaged device discovery section. So that's how we can kind of peel them out of there. And then you can go track it down, what's going on with that. Now, it's not an automatic remediation where it's going to kick them off the network or anything like that, like a NAC, but it's the next best thing that it can report on it and tell us, exactly what's going on. So that's unmanaged device discovery, how we can find those, other devices that are not computers with agents on them. Lastly, we have data analytics. Data analytics is an add-on product that maybe not everybody owns, but it's part of the technology in the console here that you can license that gives us the ability to kind of extend that one step further. So if we go into the discovery here, we have the ability to do things like scan for SNMP based devices. So if we edit this scan subnet, for example, we kind of walk through there, you can say, hey, yes, scan this particular IP range, and I want you to use this SNMP community. You'd probably have something better than just public. And you're going to say what SNMP OIDs that you're scanning for, and you're going to say go and scan for it. And then what happens is if you go into your asset control section, it has the ability to categorize those devices and get more information on them. So in that other view, you didn't see any information. You just said, oh, this is probably a printer, and it had an IP address and a name, and that was it. Here we can actually get inventory information. You can open up the inventory of a printer and see all the SNMP-based information that you have associated with it. It can tell you firmware and page count and print server, etc. You can even do things where you right-click on it and manage it by opening up the web console to be able to manage that printer, things like that. So that's kind of the subcomponent of data analytics with our discovery services and asset control to help answer number one. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second, use that Q&A box if you have any questions on CSC control number one. And if there's no questions, I get to go back and tell my boss how amazing I am at explaining everything on the first try that no one even has to ask. So I appreciate that. Okay, so no questions yet. I'll move on to the, what's the SQL query again, somebody asks. So this one is one of my favorites because a lot of times you always ask for that, that relative. You're looking for a date, but you don't want to put in today's date. So the parameter that you can use is get date and then open and close parentheses, and then in my case, minus 180. So hopefully you can see that okay. There are several other SQL query items that you can use inside of queries because really that's all it technically is a SQL query on the back end. So in this case, get date and parentheses minus 180. Okay, let's jump on to the next one. Next, security control. Inventory of authorized and unauthorized software. And the details on this are that we should actively manage via inventory, track, and correct all software on the network so that only authorized software is installed and can execute, and unauthorized and unmanaged software is located and prevented from installation and execution. And the answer to that, or the Ivanti tool that we're going to use, is our reports and SLM, our software license monitoring. John, I'm going to circle back to your question here at the end of section number 2. So the exact same thing except for software. How do we know what software that we have on our systems? How do we know what's unauthorized? This is a pretty broad problem for most organizations. So the first thing that you want to do is potentially, just look at what software that you have. Sometimes, just eyeballing it and looking at a sampling of computers is a very handy way of finding information about your network. So if you open up here, you can look at just take a particular inventory item. We're going to scroll down here to our software on the left-hand side. And you can see there's 4 different subsections that we have. And we just pull those from different databases. For example, add and remove programs is just like it sounds. That's the add and remove programs. Probably one of the most accurate that you're going to come across and helpful for your purposes, as opposed to other ones like package that pulls from the MSI database. MSI database sometimes has a lot of unnecessary things in there, but it's a different perspective on seeing what software is on all the machines. So here we can see the add and remove program detail. I can see the registered owner, the product, the publisher, etc. I can see what exists on one particular machine. If I needed a big, giant, comprehensive list, I could come up with a query that says something like, show all software. I could go down here to say software, add and remove programs, program name, and I could just say exists. I'm going to insert that in down there. Down here, I'm going to scroll down to the same thing and say software, add and remove programs, program name. And while we're at it, let's add the publisher and install date just for fun. All right, so we're going to save that query. And now I have a query called show all software. Now this is not going to be incredibly practical to use day to day. First of all, in my very small environment, I pulled back 8,000 items, which is quite a bit to look at. And in larger environments, it's going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rows. So not particularly practical, but you can kind of scroll through and see what's going on with the different software applications that you have on your system. Probably something that's going to be a little bit more likely is we would tweak that query to say, instead of show all software, maybe you find a particular piece of software that you don't want. You can find who has that. So for example, let's just say that, I don't know, let's just say QuickBooks is an application that we don't want. I can update this query to say computer software, add and remove programs, program name, like QuickBooks, and it's actually going to narrow it down, and I would probably need to change the query up here, so I can say show QuickBooks. This query is now going to show all the computers that I have that have QuickBooks installed on it, and the versions that they have, the install date, the publisher, etc. So this is a good way, once you find a piece of contraband software that you don't want, a very easy way to find who has that and be able to go track that down. So that's one way to do it via a query. How would be an easier way to find out kind of what software is on your network? Well, that's where we should get into our software license monitoring. You can open up here under Tools, Reporting and Monitoring, Software License Monitoring. It opens up in this separate web console. I've already opened it up here. On the left-hand side, go over here to the Discovered section. Discovered is going to be all of the software on all of your computers. Here you can see that we've discovered 2,511 items. And a little bit easier way to digest this would be to start looking at the top of the heavy hitters. Let's worry about our low-hanging fruit. So I would sort it by this installed up here at the top. Let's sort it the other way. What this tells us is how many computers have this particular piece of software on it. Oh, I have 53 computers with the Java Auto Updater. I have 59 computers with Microsoft Silverlight. I have 63 computers with Landisk Advanced Agent. This is a little bit more digestible to scroll through and say, hey, is this approved? Is this disapproved? Might as well make a shortcut. If you care about something from a licensing perspective, we won't get into the real details of software license monitoring, but you can add that to a monitored product in case you have to pay a license fee for it, so that you can kind of pay attention and keep track of your licenses. So while you're going through, you can kind of do double duty and add those up to monitored. You wouldn't care about really things like Java and Chrome and things that are free of cost. But anyway, you can kind of scroll down here and until you find maybe software that you don't approve of. This is grouping it by the software, so it's a little bit more of a manageable list to go through. And again, by using the sorting by the installed, it makes it a lot easier for you to prioritize. You know, don't start with the one piece of software that's on one computer. Yeah, let's eventually get there, but you know, being able to you know, start with the heavy hitters is great. So that's how you're going to go through and pick out software that you that may be potentially a piece of contraband. Back in our CSC control, if you notice the one of the last things, it says we should prevent the execution or installation of this particular product. So the one thing that you want to do is, first of all, find, which we did, you know, up until this point. Now you want to prevent the installation or the execution. So that's a little bit more complicated. The first thing to prevent the installation would be, you know, it ties really, really well into our last control, number 5, and we'll get to that. But that's controlling the use of admin privileges. If we take away admin privileges, then we can very easily keep the number of applications that they install to a minimum. There's still certain applications that only install the profile or things like that. But you know, every little step we can take towards the security is better. So getting rid of admin rights for the end users to keep them from installing it is definitely key. The other thing is preventing them from running it. Well, to prevent people from running it, we have a couple of different solutions. For those of you who are familiar with you know, the Security Suite product, we have a section in here under Endpoint Security and our application control. This gives us the ability to do things like application whitelisting and so forth to make sure that they can't run applications that are on their machine regardless of how they got there. This is a relatively basic version of it. This is where I'll chime in and actually say all of the acquisitions that Ivanti has been making lately, they purchased a company called AppSense that has an application manager product that is extremely well put together version of application control. This version of application control has a lot of caveats. It takes a lot of kind of heavy-handed maintenance. It works, but you know, there's a lot of administrator input to make it work. The AppSense version of Application Manager is much, much smoother. It does a lot of work kind of on its own. It uses this cool concept of trusted ownership to take away 95% of the babysitting that you typically have to do with an application management product. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that and be happy to talk to anyone afterwards how that works. Okay, so that's kind of the section on our software. Let me stop for a second. I got a couple of questions outstanding. First of all, the one sort of from the last one as well is how do we automate a query and run it to an email? Like I kept saying things like, oh, well, send an email to the help desk based on this. You can do it with pretty much any subcomponent. I don't care what you're dealing with. In this case, it's a query. So, for example, let's just use our stale computers as an example. I could do export to CSV, or I could do a report. These are manual kind of things. But if I click on this and say I want to create a new report, it's going to open up in our reporting engine. And I can do different things. I can do charts. I can do graphs. Here's what the report's going to look like. So here's our reports, gives me information about my stale computers. I could change this text up here at the top to, give a better direction to the help desk or something like that. Now when I go and save this report, it says it saved my stale computers report. I'm going to go over to Report and Monitoring, Reports. And under My Reports now, I have stale computers. What I can do is I can right-click on it and I can say Schedule. When you say Schedule, you get to choose what the format is. For example, PDF might be convenient for me, so I'm going to say PDF. What's going to happen is it's going to jump over to our Schedule Task subsection. And under Schedule Task, if I open up the properties on that task, I could go to the Schedule Task and say, I want to start later. I want to start every Monday, oh, that was in the past. Starting next Monday, I want it to happen at 8 a.m., and I want it to repeat every week. So now this report kicks off automatically every Monday at 8 a.m., and I can go to the recipients here. Now, the recipients, they must be a LAN desk administrator, and if they're not LAN desk administrators, you could just kind of create a bogus one for an email list or something like that. And then they just go and check the box to say, yes, these are the people that I want them to be emailed out to. It also publishes them to a share. This is kind of, instead of sending them the report, they have to come and get it, and it would just be on a certain share every day, and it would just refresh on its own. Here under SMTP configuration, you just put in your SMTP stuff to send to your email server. So that's how you can automate the queries to run and turn into reports and get sent out to all the users. That same kind of thing works for the kind of other outstanding question for software. You know, if I wanted to create that other query that was all software or specific software, I could, like this QuickBooks software, it's just a query. I would use the exact same model. Additionally, if you go under here under reports, there is quite a few canned reports from a software perspective that you could have it schedule as well. So if you want to know software product usage, you know, we can just come in here and schedule that. So just go and create a report, either in software license monitoring or queries. They'll show up in here, then just right click and schedule, and you can have that sent out. All right, that's section 2. Let's go jump back over to number 3. Okay, number 3 says, secure configurations for hardware and software on mobile devices, laptops, workstations, and servers. And the fine print is, establish, implement, and actively manage via track, report on, and correct the security configuration of laptops, servers, workstations with rigorous configuration management and change control process in order to prevent attackers from exploiting vulnerable services and settings. Now, that was quite a mouthful, and that's a pretty broad-ranging control, probably the biggest control that they have in here, because it touches so many things. It touches mobile devices, it touches laptops, workstations, servers. I mean, it might as well just said everything should have secure configurations. So let's try and break it down into a couple of bite-sized pieces. We're going to talk about security threats, provisioning, and MDM to help solve this problem. Okay, so provide secure configurations of your mobile devices. So in the Ivanti Console, we have Mobility Manager. If you haven't used Mobility Manager before, a couple of notes on it. You need a cloud service appliance to be able to talk across the internet. So you need to have that CSA in place. But once you do, we can install agents on your phones, iOS and Android. So, you know, for example, here's an iPhone that I have. Here's all the kind of network details associated with it. If you go here under the agent settings, there's actually an entire section called mobility. So here in mobility, you can create different agent configurations. So if you wanted to create configuration for mobile connectivity, for things like if you want to give them a certificate or publish Wi-Fi settings, if you need to have it automatically connect to their Exchange or Office 365. And then lastly, we have mobile security. So this would be the kind of what the control is talking about, being able to you know, lock down the device and provide secure configuration management. So here I can set a passcode. Oh, you need to have a passcode. It's got to be 11 digits long. We're going to lock your screen after X number of minutes. iOS restrictions. I want to block apps being installed. I don't want in-app purchases. I don't want to use the iTunes Store. Don't use iCloud for backup. You know, you get to pick all of the different settings here. Here's our Android functionality. We can turn on and off. You can't use the camera. You can't use Bluetooth. You know, whatever you want. You go in and create this secure configuration, and then you go and apply that to that particular set of machines. So you would just go in here and say, oh, my mobile security is going to be, you know, this is for our sales team and their phones. You can set that as the default as you want. Then I can schedule this out to be applied to a particular set of devices. Now you could do that based on a group. You could say all iOS devices behave this way. You could do it based on you know, an Active Directory group. You could do it based on just a manual group where you're dragging machines. You could just do it based on everyone. Create a query that says show all mobile devices and do it that way. So our MDM products is how we can solve the mobile component of that. The next section that they talk about is kind of our endpoints. So I'm going to lump in laptops and workstations. They're effectively the same thing to us. the best way to do that, well, actually, if we jump back, I want to comment on the couple of things here at the start. Notice what it says. It says establish and implement security configurations. So the first step, obviously, that's plain and simple. We need to establish, but a lot of organizations haven't done that yet. If you haven't done that yet, I recommend that you start with writing it down. You need to create a policy that says, here's what we do to our machines in order to, in order to harden them. And there's a million different guides out there. If you're in a certain industry, maybe you're in, a federal organization, they have a lot of hardening guides. They have this whole STIG program. Maybe you're in education, there's other education-associated hardening guides. Don't start from scratch. Go plagiarize one of them. They just publish, hey, turn off this service, tweak that setting, change this registry entry, whatever you want to do. Get that established baseline and get it written down in a policy, and then start implementing it, right? So establishing, we create the policy. Implement is how we actually put it in practice. The best way to do that, in my opinion, is through provisioning. So if you haven't used provisioning before, it's our imaging solution. After we implement that, or after we establish our baseline of what our computer should look like, have that be the base for all your images. In provisioning, you can do lots of different things. If it says as part of your baseline you need to stop a certain service or disable something or turn on a registry entry, whatever you want. In our, I have one named that. In our templates here, you can do all of those actions. So I can add an action here. Maybe the control says that you should stop a service. Great, we have the ability to stop services in here. Maybe you need to update the registry and change a registry key to something. Great, we can do that. Maybe you need to put a particular file on the computer for whatever reason. That we can install a script. So we have lots of different options for helping you implement that established baseline that you come up with. The next kind of component of the control that they're talking about is a rigorous change control process. Change control is in the ITSM family of, it's an ITSM family. And it is a process for making sure that we document and request permission and keep track of all of the changes that we make. It's more politics and training humans than it is technology, but it's an incredibly important part of the process. So if you haven't really dug into change control, now's probably the time that you need to start looking into it. And we have lots of cool technologies that can help you implement change control processes and have an entire team of people that help implement that. So just kind of hit us up afterwards if you want to hear more about change control. If you already have change control in place, great. Stick to it as it relates to your end devices and making sure that whenever you're changing something, help desk tech can't just go randomly change the status of a service on all of our new builds, just because he thought he should. That affects quite a few systems downstream. So we need to make sure we go through the change control process to get approval for things like that. The last thing you can look at is things like security threats. So in security threats, we have the ability to look for bad configurations. So if we go over here to our vulnerability management, under patch and compliance, over here on the left-hand side, we have security threat. Now, what are security threats? Security threats are things that are not bugs in the software, but they are actual misconfigurations. An example of that would be disabling autoplay on Windows. Autoplay should be off. It's a security threat to have it on. Well, this will actually scan the machine and tell us the status of autoplay. I can right-click on it and open on affected computers. It's going to tell me the number of computers that I have that have autoplay enabled, and then I can do something about it. If over here on the right-hand side, if you can see the column says repairable, if it says yes to repairable, we can actually turn this on as an autofix and have it turn off autoplay for us. So not just notifying us that autoplay is enabled, but actually taking the next step and going and turning it off. We can't do that for everything. You know, some of the scans in here are things like, oh, are they a domain controller? Well, we can't just go run DC promo and demote everything automatically. That's a lot bigger problem, but we can at least identify it. So you can see I have this number of machines that have autoplay on. We should be going and correcting that. So there's a very large list of those types of security settings that have been known to be a problem. You can also even kind of go in and write scripts and, you know, scan for your own custom versions of it as well. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions on that particular section, so, and John's going to be asking me to speed up, so I'm going to jump on to the next one here. Security control number 4, continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation. Fine print, continuously acquire, assess, and take action on new information in order to identify vulnerabilities and to remediate and minimize the window of opportunity for attackers. So I think this one is actually relatively straightforward, and we can kind of, at least from the tools perspective, it's a simple answer. It's just in practice, it takes, you know, quite a bit of diligence on our part to kind of stay on top of it. So notice what it's asking us to do. It's asking us to assess, and it's asking us to remediate. So what does that mean? Assess means find, and remediate means fix. So we need to find and fix. Jump back over to our console. Here in patch management under vulnerabilities, you know, the default configuration is going to set to, you know, scan for this content. I highly recommend that you keep it scanning for everything. Here under agent settings, if you open up a distribution and patch setting, sorry, my server's running a little bit slow today. But if we open one of these up, there's a section to state what should we be scanning for, and it's here under scan options. I am a huge fan of saying, I want to scan for everything. I want to scan for every vulnerability in the world. And you know what? I don't care if it's scanning for an Office 2000 vulnerability that I don't have anymore in my organization. Because inevitably, every time I was doing an install, I deployed LDMS for 10 years. Every time I went to a deployment and they said, oh, no, we don't have Office 2000. You don't need to scan for that. I convinced them, hey, why don't we just scan for it once? Almost every time we went and found Office 2000. So those kinds of things can normally slip through the cracks, and they can be a huge vulnerability. So I don't want things to slip through the cracks with vulnerabilities. You're only as strong as your weakest link when it comes to patch management. So I'm a big fan of saying scan for everything. We can scan for like 8,000 things in 7 minutes. If you were to really go through and filter out the 1,000 you think you don't have, you saved yourself 1 minute on a process that runs in the background and visible to the end user. So you're not really saving anything. So I'm a big fan of saying scan for everything. What's going to happen then is everything that is actually detected is going to show up here into the subsection called detected. This is where it actually matters in your organization because we have found these. And you can see if I right-click on one of them, I go to the affected computers. It's going to tell me what exactly computers have them. It's going to give me the exact details. You know, this doesn't just check the add-move programs. In this case, it looked for a very specific component and found versions that were incompatible. This is very important to make sure that we don't just trust the installer to say, oh, yes, it was for sure installed. We verify. We trust but verify. And if the DLL hasn't been updated or whatever, we're not actually going to do that. The next part is we want to make sure that our machines are scanning on a regular basis. Back here under those agent settings, you have your patch-only settings here, and we have our schedule. I'm a big fan of getting it to scan fairly regularly. Instead of saying, oh, well, I wait for Super Tuesday. Well, Super Tuesday is interesting, but I don't want Super Tuesday to drive our behavior because that's a Microsoft holiday or whatever you want to call it. Think about Java. Java is just as vulnerable, if not causing more problems out there than Microsoft. So I want to get people in the mindset that we're patching every single week. So I like to get this to where we're scanning very, very frequently. Maybe we're scanning, repeating after 7 days. Maybe we're doing it after 3 days. You know, some very, very rapid cycle of patching. And if you control the end user settings so that it's not going to impact them and it's not going to, you know, kind of kick them out of the machine, and we just give them the ability to snooze it and things like that, then it's not a big deal for us to patch on a much more frequent basis. in order to make sure you're downloading the right content, if you go into Patch and Compliance here, when you click on the little download button here, make sure you're grabbing this very bottom one called Microsoft Windows Vulnerabilities on the Windows side. The important part about that is this grabs all third-party content as well. It makes it look like it's just Microsoft content. No, that's not true. This is all content destined for Microsoft Windows operating systems. So it's going to get Chrome, it's going to get Firefox, Java, et cetera, as well as all of the Microsoft patches. And to answer one of the questions in the Q&A right now, this checkbox here says that we're only going to download the patches for the detected definitions, meaning we're going to scan for Office 2000, which is a tiny little XML file. It's not a big deal. But we're only going to download that Office 2000 patch if we find it in our environment. We're doing it for detected definitions only. So if we keep this radio button the way that it is, we will not download junk patches and patches that we don't need. Okay, so you find things in your environment. You've detected this patch. This patch is an outstanding problem. What do I do about it? Repair is a manual repair process. I can send it out to 1 machine, 5 machines, 100 machines. I can pick the time frame. It's great for anything ad hoc or any kind of testing. But in reality, long term, it's going to be obnoxious to have to repair all the individual patches on all the individual computers. So I highly recommend you look into Autofix. Autofix says when we find this patch, go and repair it. And if we're scanning on that really regular basis, like I like every 3 days, every 7 days, something very, very common like that, if I go and set this to enable Autofix, it's going to start pushing out the next time that scan cycle comes up for that computer. But you can kind of have a nice stepped approach to it. For example, you could create a patch pilot group. This is based on a scope. So I could go grab 100 machines and say, these guys are my pilot group. I only want the patch to go out to them. And I'm going to set it to Autofix on Tuesday, and maybe my scans run every Wednesday. Then on Thursday, if I have no complaints, I'm going to come back in here and say, okay, now I want to do it for all workstations. And that's going to get for all the workstations I have, and then maybe in the end I want to get global. So it's workstation servers, it's everyone, everywhere. The really important part about this is it doesn't forget. Think about that WannaCrypt vulnerability we had a couple of months ago. It was everywhere. It was on the news. My mother was asking me about it. It was incredibly exciting. Now, everyone's forgotten about it. Nobody remembers it's MS-017-010. Everyone's forgotten about it. If we auto-fix that, it's not going to be forgotten when you go and do a provision a month from now, and that is unpatched. Since you've set this to be auto-fixed, one of the provisioning tasks you should set is say, run a security scan, run a patch scan, and it's going to automatically fix that vulnerability. So auto-fix is kind of the end goal. I want to get to the point that, I'm doing, 10 patches at a time. I'm going into auto-fix and I'm saying, push that out to my patch pilot group. If everything goes well, I'm going to go push it out to all my workstations. Get to the point that everything in detected here shows that you have Autofix enabled. You can even scroll over here and say, is Autofix enabled? So you just sort like that. Mine's a demo system, so it's not there, but you get the idea. You want to have your machine, have all the vulnerabilities end up being set to Autofix. Okay, so again, speeding up, I got one more control to talk about before we're done. The last one, controlled use of admin privileges. And the idea behind that is we want to track, control, prevent, and correct the use, assignment, and configuration of administrative privileges on computers, network, and applications. We can't do too much with things like the network and applications. Those are a little bit out of our scope, but the computers, that's right smack dab in the middle of our scope, so we can control that. And we can do that a couple of different ways. So first of all, you can look at a computer and you can see what administrators that it has. I can right-click on a computer and I can go to Manage Local Users and Groups, and it's going to show me that information. That would be too tedious on a machine-by-machine basis. So if I go back over to our security threats, we already kind of looked at that. We looked at the one that was Autofix. We have one in here called Administrative Group Membership. So if we open up the details on that, what it's going to say is based on the custom variable that I have set here, number 2, it is going to trigger whenever there are more than this number of users in the administrator group. You're probably going to have domain admins and your help desk and whatever. So you're going to have to establish a baseline that says, I want it to be X, I want it to be 4, I want it to be 3, you know, whatever number that is, then every machine that is over that threshold, you're going to be able to see very easily. I right-click on it and I say affected computers, and I can see that this particular computer has more than, in this case, 2 administrative accounts detected. And here's the accounts. I have, you know, administrator. I have some SID. You know, normally it'll resolve to the actual usernames there. But now I can investigate that particular computer. Go get onto it. Look at the number of administrators in that administrator group and get rid of them. They probably don't need that administrative rights. The next step is to worry about local admin passwords. Most people, they set up the admin password when they deploy the machine, and they never come back and ever change it. That's definitely a security risk. Right in the console, we have the ability to change that. So if you open up local users and groups, there's actually a button up at the top that gives us, oh no, that's not the one I wanted. The one I wanted is called Manage Local Users and Groups. So I open up Manage Local Users and Groups. It might take a second longer to open here because that machine is not actually online. But there's a button at the top that gives us the ability to change the password. And you can actually schedule that, and you can actually roll that out to a large number of machines. So you should have some kind of policy. We rotate the local admin password every 180 days or whatever. And you can set it via this GUI right here and then say what machines you want to roll it out to. So you just hit this little button right up here. I don't know what that looks like, a little clock thingy. You click on that and it says what account. I want the administrator account. I want the password to be super deluxe top secret password. And then I hit schedule. I now have a scheduled task to change that password. I grab the machines up here at the top and I drag them onto that task and I execute it. Now, those local machines have their administrative passwords reset to whatever I want. So that's a good way to kind of keep on top of that local admin password, because it's not just domain passwords that we need to worry about. Lastly, get rid of admin rights. We still have way too many computers out there that local end users have admin rights. We got to get over that hump. We got to take it away. It's difficult, I know, but we need to kind of get over that hump. If you're kind of stuck in that situation where users do have admin rights and we can't get rid of it, and it's a problem, you know, again, in that new acquisition of AppSense that Ivanti did last year, their application manager has a great way to control that, to give admin rights just to an individual application, kind of like, you know, almost like UAC, but they don't have to type in the password. Or if they have full admin rights, we can take away their ability to stop services or uninstall programs so they can still have admin rights, you know, those kind of developers and things like that, but we're going to stop them from doing certain things. Okay, I'm going to jump to the Q&A here really quick. I'm going to come back to the earlier two on patch management here in a second. Can we track which local admin password has been changed? That's a great question. I don't think so. I don't think we keep track of that log of when we change it and how we change it. It's more of an ad hoc kind of a thing. Can we track? And if someone sets it locally, we don't keep track of that. So I'm going to maybe do a tiny bit of research, see if there's any better answer to that. But short term, to my knowledge right now, the answer is no, we can't keep track of that. Okay, I'm going to jump back up to the patch management. Do you need to have a cross-section of users' computers for your test group to make sure it shows up problems? For example, to scan IT, maybe accounting settings are affected. Yeah, Jeff, I absolutely agree with that. When you go to create a patch pilot group, do not pick the 4 people in IT and be done with it. That is not a patch pilot group. Get yourself a good smattering of people. Someone from accounting, someone from distribution, 4 people in the warehouse, you know, get everyone, you know, but not an entire department. You know, if there's 10 people in accounting, grab 2 of them, you know, because you don't want to take the entire accounting department offline, but you want to make sure that it doesn't conflict with any accounting settings. So yes, absolutely, get a nice smattering. And here's my little secret. Don't tell them they're in the patch pilot group, because they will then come back and say, yep, I ran out of gas on the way to work today. It was probably that pesky Landis that made that happen. They'll blame everything on it. So don't tell them they're in the patch pilot group. Let that be kind of a little bit of a secret. And then we can just on the back end know, hey, a bunch of people that are, you know, in this group are suddenly calling in with problems. Yep, it was probably one of those patches that were recently applied. So yes, get very broad with that patch pilot group. You can even have multiple tiers. Have, patch pilot group A, patch pilot group B, where A is a smaller subset, B is a larger subset, and then, kind of escalating from there. The next question, on Autofix, can we set it up where we autofix on a customized folder rather than all of the patches? Yes, you can do that. So I'm pretty sure I understand your question. Let me walk through it and tell me if this answers your question. So let's say I have a particular group of vulnerabilities. I'm being audited by a department, but I'm being audited by someone, and they say, hey, we really, really care about XYZ. Why can't I create a custom group right here? There we go, new group. For a while, NIST or someone else would put out these top 10 vulnerabilities, or, someone will say, hey, give me your stats on these. I could go up here to my vulnerabilities, and, you wouldn't be just randomly grabbing them. You'd have a set of vulnerabilities that you particularly care about. Now I have a group called top 10 vulnerabilities. If I wanted to, in my agent settings, I could create a new agent setting. I don't want it to be the default, but I could create a new one called, top 10 vulnerabilities with Autofix. I would go down here to my patch settings, and I would say, scan this particular group, top 10 vulnerabilities, and then down at the bottom I could check the Autofix. So then when this particular scan runs, it only would fix these vulnerabilities that show up in that group, and it would turn on Autofix. You could technically have this be the default, and then your process would be when you approve a vulnerability, you go and drag it from here and drag it down into that group. I don't like that to be the exclusive patching methodology, but, it's kind of an ad hoc for, audits, or when someone comes in and says, hey, show me the status of these vulnerabilities, I think it's a good fit. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Yeah, about the session recording, you're going to get a recording link afterwards. We have to upload it and so forth, so it might be a couple of days, but you will for sure get the recording of it. We'll also send out the presentation itself, the PowerPoint, the top 5. I simply just stole those off the CSC website, but to show which Ivanti tool, we'll make sure to send out the PowerPoint as well afterwards.
I'll try and send that out today, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I apologize on talking so fast. I'm under a time limit. I don't want to take all day, so I apologize for that. We'll make sure to get the video out, and you can, slow it down as much as you want, repeat it. If anyone has questions afterwards, John will send my contact information. You want to have a further conversation about it? That's why we're here. You can buy Ivanti products from a lot of different people. What sets us apart and what we think our value is that we want to have a relationship with you to make sure you get the most out of your product. So, hit me up and ask a question. Happy to jump on the phone and talk about it, and tell you what other customers are doing and how they're solving different problems and so forth. So, I'm more than happy to do that. So he'll send out my contact information as well when that goes out.
Well said. That's all part of our Signature Concierge service there. They can take a look on our website on the contact page to learn more about it, what separates us from the other partners out there. So great job, Brian. Appreciate it. I will try and send that link out today. We're going to be doing these monthly. Next month, I want to plug, I believe it's Palo Alto Networks. We're gonna deep dive on that, I believe. So thanks for joining us. Brian, go ahead and wrap it up.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. Like I said, don't hesitate to reach out when you have any questions. But otherwise, thanks a bunch, everyone. We'll see you later.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.